Hello and welcome to this week's Boardroom Buddies podcast. This week is quite interesting if you're a small business. I wonder if you have ever thought about risk in your business. This week we're going to be talking with Rachel Bowden of Thinking Audit. And the minute you say audit, everybody automatically thinks it's financial. But actually, there are some other things that you can think about in your business that don't really relate to the finances of the business, but are all about managing the risk and the performance of your business. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for mentioning finances already. I think I probably should get a tattoo that says I'm not an accountant.
No, and it's automatic, isn't it? The minute you mention that word audit, we automatically go to the financial thinking about it. But of course, well, I'm going to let you tell us about your business and about Thinking Audit. So yeah, tell us your story. What is Thinking Audit? What do you actually do?
Oh, the $1 million question.
Yeah.
So, and it might mean that I need to define some other words as well. So broadly, I work with audit committees and I work with internal auditors to help them be more efficient in the way they deliver internal audit, to help them really understand either the type of assurance they need as non-executive directors or the type of assurance they need to provide. And when we think about assurance, really, it's that independent view about how well are we doing, how efficiently are we working, are we doing what we need to do? And internal auditors, for anyone that's not come across that term before, internal audit is a profession in its own right, full of people like me, some of whom will be accountants,
Right.
but many of whom going, I'm not an accountant. And it's a profession of people who are really there to, trying to think how best to explain it, to provide that independent and objective view on how good an organisation's governance is, how well it's managing its risks, and how good its internal control is. So there's quite a lot of focus on things like process and control, but really it's taking a step back and saying, with like a common sense hat, does that make sense what you're doing? Is that the best way you could do it? Have you thought about all of the risks there, and are you doing everything that you can to really manage the business well, in a very simplistic way, I guess?
Yeah. I know from having been a trustee on a few boards that certainly the audit side of it and managing governance and risk is really key.
Yeah.
But it was kind of stepping away from that and running our own business that we have taken some of that and applied it in the business that we now have. It's not as formal and it's nowhere near as in-depth as the kind of thing that you do with a larger organization. And that was the reason for asking you to come onto the podcast, because I know from having previous businesses that it's not something you think about. What are the risks?
Yeah. And it's really interesting to take stock, and I've had to do it for my own small business as well. So previously I've worked in much larger organisations, public sector, large corporates, firms of accountants. And there's just a whole framework there of governance, of risk management. And then all of a sudden it's just one or two of you, maybe more, but in a small business. And actually thinking about the risk sometimes gets a bit lost, because I think especially as small business owners, we're just so busy doing and working with our clients that we don't always take stock. And ultimately risk management's quite a reflective process. And it's taking time out to really think about, are we doing the right things for the right reasons, I guess. So yeah, I absolutely agree that it will be far less formal and probably fewer layers, but some of that same thought process would still be there.
Yeah. And I mean, that part of what we do in Mastermind is, a small part of that is that we actually look at risk that we're facing as an owner of a small business. And you were very helpful in that process when we did that. It was ages ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah, it does feel like ages ago. Yeah.
It was, yeah. But it was a very useful exercise. And I don't think it's something that we even consider as a
No.
small, a small business owner, as an owner of a small business?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And actually, risk management can just be about asking yourself a series of questions. So the
Yeah.
first one is actually what we're trying to achieve, which,
Mm,
I mean, it sounds a bit daft, but Jackie, you know, from the businesses that you work with, not everyone always has a clear vision
mm,
or type of direction of travel. Um, so the starting point is what are we trying to achieve and why? And the
yeah.
next point of risk management is really what could stop us getting there?
Mm,
Um, and it's as simple as that, but really trying to think around the topic. So,
yeah.
for example, there will always be things, small businesses, things like cash flow will
Yeah.
always be a risk area, or for most will be a risk area. But
Mm,
also in the nature of the world that we live and work in, things like cyber risks. So that could be
mm,
the risks of hacks or something
mm,
unwanted, but it could also just be really poor Wi-Fi and broadband, uh, affecting your ability to deal with your clients on a daily basis. I mean,
yeah.
certainly for me, I do so much work remotely now since before the pandemic lockdown that, good broadband is absolutely key for me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed when I'm doing podcasts that good broadband is absolutely essential.
Yeah, it's just really thinking around all those different facets, and you can do that in loads of different ways. Sometimes you could, I guess, write down some headings and brainstorm underneath that, but it can be useful to sometimes do it as an exercise with someone else as well, even if you're the only person in your business,
Yeah.
sitting down with a friend or family member and just having that brainstorm and thinking about different aspects, which are maybe finance, customers, future plans,
Mm,
technology, people, just break it into some areas like that, maybe future markets or markets that you've been in before. They
yeah.
all sound like positive things that we all need to have in the business, but then
Yeah.
start thinking about what are my risk areas. So, for example, in terms of your client base, one thing that a lot of people don't think about, but it's really key, is over reliance on a single client. What happens if that client decides to go elsewhere or ceases to exist or just doesn't need your services anymore?
Mm, yeah.
Um, so, that type of thing can be really helpful. So that exercise we did, I think there were about 5 of us, weren't there? We all sat
Yeah.
and brainstormed and then challenged each other a bit on our
Yeah.
risks. It was so useful. But for me, it's taking the time out to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of risk management and the process, I see
Mm,
that every day in my
mm,
clients, and I see how they get assurance on how well they're managing risk.
yeah.
But taking time out to do it for your own business, it feels like a luxury, but actually it's really important.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So we did that exercise actually during the pandemic on Zoom.
I did, yes.
So I mean, there would be something for us to add to that question. What could stop you? Could a pandemic stop us?
Yeah. And do you know what? It's a really interesting point. Thinking about all the clients I've worked with over the years, most big organizations a few years ago had pandemic risk on their risk register because do you remember there was H5N1, which I think is bird flu, and there's swine flu and SARS. Um, but I don't think anyone had really got to the bottom of the so what, and it's the so what of the risk that's important. So a
Mm,
pandemic, an illness is just an illness. It's the so what of that. So,
mm,
if you can't get to your customers, if you can't deliver your service, if 25% of your staff are ill at once and can't be functioning,
mm,
so many things like that I really noticed looking back that organizations before the pandemic had things like pandemic illnesses as a risk, although
mm,
over time that type of dropped off after swine flu and bird flu went a bit quieter. But
yeah.
then we thought about this, what did it really mean? So if
Mm,
you're a university, the type of, how do you engage with new students to get your future pipeline in, for example, is a real risk. It's the
mm.
always that pipeline of new students coming in, which brings life and, income to the university, for example.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned clients a moment ago. Who's a typical client for you? Who's a good client for you?
Well, my clients can probably be any sector. I tend not to do a lot of financial services because certainly in my area that becomes um, quite a niche area of knowledge, although I do a little bit of work in that sector. But so I can work with public sector charities, PLCs, large private companies, and I do. So it's a really nice mixture. And my target clients and the people that I typically work with tend to be heads of internal audits. They're people who have a position within the company to lead their assurance function, sometimes risk managers, quite often the chair of the audit committee, and actually chairs of audit committee have been a really good referral source for me, recommending me to other organisations. And then quite often the finance director as well, because while what we're talking about isn't necessarily financial, there will be a financial element, and finance directors often have areas such as risks management, internal audit, assurance, whether you think it belongs under finance or not. Quite often finance directors will have some type of managing responsibility maybe for some of those functions.
Yeah, they seem to lump things like HR and all of that under one person's responsibility. That often the financial director or the company secretary kind of thing.
You tend to get like that, almost that like type of big corporate services functions that you see now that have got lots of very talented people with areas of specialism. But as you say, within that. So actually you mentioned company secretaries, so heads of governance, company secretaries as well.
Of course.
Quite often one of my introductory points. But I tend to spend a lot of my time with the heads of internal audit, their team, and the audit committee.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the risk management, and you had a little template which you very kindly shared with us. So if anybody wants that template, I can forward that on by email, because it's a nice simple template to use as the owner of a small business, and it's very good for taking, for facilitating you taking some time to kind of step back and have a look at your business, which is something that we, kind of the purpose of Mastermind really is for you to step out of the day-to-day delivery and to review what you're doing and making sure you're moving in the right way. So tell us how you started your business. What made you move out of the kind of corporate setting then into running your own business?
Probably years ago, when I was in one of the firms of accountants providing outsourced internal audit services, I used to do quite a lot of quality assurance work. In fact, I still do, but at that point, I was doing quite a lot of quality assurance and external quality assessment of internal audit functions. And one of my clients who had previously been a colleague said to me, "Oh, the nature of what you do, that'd be great as a small business." And while at that point it wasn't the right time for me, it just type of sowed a seed. And so probably a few years later, that seed had always been there. And I got to the stage where I was really busy, but really bored. And I'd been with the same organisation quite a long time. And I could have stayed there forever, been perfectly fine. But I got to that point, whereas if I don't give this a go, I just never will.
Yeah.
So I did, and I worked what felt like the longest 7.5 months notice. Gone forever, and just set up initially as a sole trader, but within a few months I incorporated, because most of my clients are large organizations with procurement functions, and they just don't like dealing with sole traders. It's much easier to be incorporated company. So while I was probably always going to do that, that probably expedited the switch that I did incorporate Thinking Audit as a company rather than just a brand that I was using.
Yeah, it's a good point to make, isn't it? That whether you decide to incorporate or not can also be influenced by who you want to work with.
Yes, and it really was. And I thought, as I said, I always thought that I would incorporate and become a limited company, but it just became really clear really quickly that my life would be so much easier if I did. So I probably was a sole trader for about 4 months in the end, I guess.
Yeah. So what were your challenges then? What did it feel like day one?
Day one, well, first of all, probably just a real culture shock, because I used to work in a firm of about 3,000 people, and I worked there for a long time, and the nature of my role meant that I knew lots of people, not just in my area but across the whole business. So while I was really excited, there was probably a real shock about, I don't have hundreds of colleagues. Where are all these people that are my sounding board or that I know and I can just chat to? So to some extent, a bit of loneliness,
Yes.
probably, I think. It was probably the initial challenge. And then after that, while it's all really exciting, it's that, okay, so now I'm head of marketing, head of finance,
Yeah.
head of client delivery all at once, and just getting the juggling right, and finding time to work type of on the business and grow the business, and not just spending all of your time delivering for clients. And even now, sometimes that can be a challenge. In the small businesses, we tend to go with the peaks and troughs of our markets and our clients. I've got definitely better at type of, for example, August is generally reasonably quiet for client work. So I normally have some work, but it's much less than other months. So actually, making sure that I therefore do something really constructive with the rest of that time.
Yes.
To grow the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that's also about preparing things to be prepared for when it gets really, really busy. As for me, it does tend to very much at the end of the year. So November, December, January always seems to be really busy for me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I know that you started the business on your own.
Yes.
Yeah. How quickly was it before you involved Rodri?
Well, I think it's 3 years, and I'd have to look back and check, but I think it's about 3 years. So for anyone listening, Rodri is my husband. He's previously a computer programmer. And it just made sense because I was using him so much as a sounding board. He wanted something new and different to do. But what it really has meant is that he's type of created time by looking after the finances, some of the admin, some of the marketing. For example, he's building a new client portal at the moment. So building on his technology skills, it really meant that I've got time to focus on clients and engagement with potential clients as well. So it works really well. And it also means that there's someone in the business for me to talk to. So it's like a mini mastermind, let alone or our wider group. Yeah, it's been absolutely great actually. And we worked throughout lockdown in the same place all the time. Yeah, and that worked really well. And I think that was the real proof of the pudding. That the business was going well. We were both at home all the time, working on the same things. And I don't think we had a single crossword. Probably touch wood now when I say that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah. I think that as business owners as well, we particularly if you're a solopreneur, sole trader, it's you on your own, and you feel that you've got to be good at everything. And so pulling someone else into the business, whether it's your other half or a business partner, but also outsourcing to other people. Because do you do your own bookkeeping and things?
Yeah, I mean, we have an accountant, but yeah, we have, we've got an accounting system. We're all digital, and it's pretty straightforward. So we've got, an expert we can call on when we need to, but the nature of our bookkeeping is really straightforward. So, we do manage that in-house most of the time. No, I do know where you're coming from in terms of that whole feeling like you have to be an expert in everything. And that's probably another thing that I struggled with because I'm a control freak. And therefore sometimes I can type of strive for perfection where it's not needed as well. I used to find that you're doing things like writing copy for the website. It gets to the stage where actually it's probably fine, just leave it alone and stop reworking it.
Yeah. Do you bounce those sorts of things off of Rodri, to kind of share them and say what you think? And
yeah, absolutely. And he's got also a really different writing style to me as well. So that's quite good, I think. Because a lot of his writing, he's got a master's in philosophy. So he's written quite a lot of academic papers. I write a lot of business papers. So actually probably quite a good foil for each other.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's been really interesting. Thank you for that. Lovely to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, good to be. Yeah.
It's been a while coming.
Yes.
So thanks everybody for listening into the podcast this week. Hope you've enjoyed hearing about maybe thinking about risk management for your business. If you would like a template, do get in touch with me by email, jax@jackiecasey.consulting. Listen to the podcast. If you like it, please subscribe, because then you'll know when the next ones are out, and pretty much they're every fortnight on a Monday. And let me know what you think of the podcast too. So Rachel, oh yes, I mustn't forget, how do people get in touch with you if they know someone who probably needs to talk to you about your services?
Okay, well, I am on LinkedIn, so it's Rachel Bowden, Bowden, or you can go to my website, which is thinkingaudit.co.uk.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.